Standing in the shadows of the ballroom, I watched my son tremble in his white tuxedo while his grandfather tapped the microphone. The room fell silent, expecting a blessing from the honorable judge. Instead, Harold laughed and called my boy an idiot, just like he had done 20 years ago. Everyone thought I would just weep. They did not know that inside my purse, I carried the secret that would burn his entire empire to the ground tonight. My name is Eleanor Ridgway, and at 58 years old, I have learned that patience is not a virtue, but a weapon. I stood near the velvet ropes at the back of the gilded ballroom in the downtown Harborfield Hotel, my hands clasped tightly in front of me. The air conditioning was humming too loudly, or perhaps that was just the blood rushing in my ears. Up on the stage, under the cascade of imported white orchids, my son Noah stood in his white tuxedo. He looked handsome, but terrified. I saw the way his fingers trembled around the stem of his champagne flute, the glass vibrating just enough to catch the light. The room was suffocatingly expensive. This was the Whittaker definition of celebration. The round tables were draped in heavy silk, laden with centerpieces that cost more than my first car. My former in-laws sat in a cluster of power suits and designer gowns near the front. A blockade of old money and influence. The golden light from the crystal chandeliers bathed them in a halo they did not deserve. I could hear the sharp clink of silver knives hitting porcelain plates and the distinct, nasal laughter of people who have never had to worry about an overdraft fee. I felt the familiar sting of isolation, the ghost of being the outsider that had haunted me for 2 decades. Then, the applause started. It began as a ripple and swelled into a wave as Harold Whittaker pushed his chair back. At 78, my former father-in-law still moved with the aggressive vitality of a man who believed the world was his courtroom. He was a legend in Harborfield, the retired judge who made careers and broke lives over scotch in the back of the country club. He buttoned his jacket, his face flushed with wine and self-importance, and took the microphone. The room hushed in reverence. They admired his straight talk, his unfiltered honesty. They had no idea that his honesty was just cruelty wrapped in a silk tie. I felt a cold calm settle over my skin. This was it. This was the moment I had been curating for 20 years. Every slight, every insult, every tear my son had shed in secret had led us to this specific coordinate in time and space. While the guests anticipated a heartwarming toast, I was visualizing the gears of a complex machine finally grinding into motion. For a second, the scene before me blurred. My mind superimposed another image over the luxury of the hotel ballroom. I saw a modest church hall. I saw crystal glasses there, too. I saw Harold, younger but just as imposing. And I saw Noah, not as this tall young man, but as a terrified 8-year-old boy, clutching the fabric of my dress, trying to make himself invisible behind my legs. The memory was sharp enough to cut. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with wedding jitters. I was not worried about the caterer running out of salmon or the DJ playing the wrong song. No. Tonight was not a wedding. Tonight was a tribunal. It was an unofficial session of the superior court of my conscience, and Harold was the defendant. I was the executioner. I shifted my weight and let my hand brush against the small, leather crossbody bag hanging at my hip. It felt heavier than it looked. It contained the payload, a simple black USB drive, a stack of folded photocopies that smelled of fresh toner, and a single sheet of paper stamped by the district court just 4 hours ago. An active arrest warrant. It was a bomb. and my hand was hovering over the detonator. I just needed the right signal. I watched Noah's eyes dart toward the head of the table. He looked at Harold with a desperate, naked hope. Even now, after everything, my son just wanted his grandfather to look at him with something other than disdain. That look on Noah's face hardened my resolve like concrete. I understood then why I had stayed in the shadows for so long. I could not leave this war until the enemy was completely destroyed. Harold brought the microphone to his lips. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute silence. He smiled, a shark baring its teeth. "I have always been a man of truth." Harold boomed, the speakers amplifying his arrogance. "And I said from the day she married him, that boy is an idiot." The room went deadly quiet. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the cold air of the ballroom. I was ready to set fire to everything he was proud of. The memory washed over me, pulling me back to a humid afternoon more than 20 years ago. It was my second wedding, held in a modest chapel on the edge of the suburbs. I was marrying Daniel, the youngest son of the Whittaker dynasty, trying to rebuild a life that had been shattered when my first husband died in a car wreck. I thought I was finding safety. I thought I was finding a father figure for Noah. Noah was only 8 years old then. He was a gangly, awkward child with knees that were always scraped and eyes that were too big for his face. He shadowed me everywhere I went that day, gripping the hem of my white dress with one hand and clutching a battered, die-cast toy car in the other. It was the last gift his father had given him. He refused to put it down, even for the photos. The reception was not a grand ballroom affair like tonight. It was a garden party in Harold's expansive backyard, intended to be intimate, but feeling more like a court summons. The grass was manicured to an unnatural perfection. White linen tablecloths draped over round tables, fluttering slightly in the breeze. Noah was trying to be good. I could see the concentration on his face as he navigated the crowd of adults. But his coordination had not yet caught up with his growth spurts. It happened in slow motion. Noah reached across the table for a bread roll, and his elbow clipped a full goblet of Merlot. The glass tipped. The red wine splashed across the pristine white cloth, spreading like an arterial wound. The goblet shattered on the patio stones with a sound that seemed to stop the entire party. Every head turned. The silence was absolute. Harold sat at the head of the table, his face already flushed with the afternoon heat and too much scotch. He looked at the stain. Then he looked at Noah. He did not offer a napkin. He did not ask if the boy was hurt. Instead, he let out a sharp, barking laugh that made my stomach turn over. "Well," Harold announced, his voice booming across the patio. "Eleanor, you certainly know how to pick a husband. But that boy of yours—" He took a long, slurping sip of his drink, savouring the audience. "That boy is a genuine idiot. You had better watch out, or he will drag this whole house down with him." The air left my lungs. Around the table, a few uncomfortable chuckles bubbled up, eager to please the patriarch. The clinking of silverware stopped. Noah stood frozen. His eyes went wide, swimming with sudden tears. His face turned a deep, burning crimson. He started blinking rapidly, a frantic, rhythmic flutter of his eyelashes, trying desperately not to cry in front of these strangers. I felt paralyzed, trapped between shock and a primal urge to scream. I looked at Daniel, my new husband, expecting him to stand up, expecting him to defend the 8-year-old boy he had promised to love. Daniel gripped my wrist under the table, his fingers tight. He leaned in, his breath smelling of champagne, and whispered, "Dad is just joking. Don't make a scene. Eleanor, please. I will. I will talk to him later." I looked at Daniel and saw the truth. He was terrified. He could not even look his father in the eye. I swallowed the fire rising in my throat. I told myself it was just the alcohol talking. I told myself that once Harold got to know Noah, he would see how sweet and creative the boy was. I told myself that silence was the price of admission for a stable life, for a future where Noah would not have to struggle. So I signaled the waiter to clean the mess and forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. That night, in the guest room of our new home, the sounds of the celebration had faded. Noah lay in the unfamiliar bed, the toy car still clutched in his hand. The moonlight cut across the duvet. "Mom," he whispered into the dark. "I am here, baby," I said, stroking his hair. He hesitated, his voice trembling. "Mom, am I really stupid?" The question broke my heart into pieces small enough to inhale. I pulled him into my arms, burying my face in his neck so he would not feel my own tears. "No," I said fiercely. "No. You just see the world differently than they do, and that makes you special. That makes you precious." He fell asleep eventually, his breathing hitching every few minutes. I left the room and walked down the hall to where my wedding dress hung on the doorframe, a ghost in the darkness. I touched the fabric and made a vow to my reflection in the hallway mirror. I swore that I would never let anyone call my son an idiot again. It was a promise I would break 1,000 times over the next 20 years. The years dissolved into a routine that felt less like a life and more like a long, slow payment plan. We lived in a sprawling colonial in the suburbs, a house that was technically ours, but spiritually belonged to Harold. He had provided the down payment, a fact he slipped into conversation with the regularity of a ticking clock. Every time a faucet leaked or the roof needed a patch, Harold would be there, standing in my foyer, reminding us that we would still be renting a cramped apartment if not for his generosity. I kept my head down and focused on survival. I worked as a mid-level accountant at Kivora North Systems, a software company about 40 minutes from our driveway. I was good at my job. I liked the clean, undeniable logic of a spreadsheet. If the numbers did not balance, you found the error and you fixed it. Life at home was not so simple. I worked hard not just for the paycheck, but to maintain a secret psychological safety net. I told myself that if everything fell apart, if Daniel ever left, or Harold ever decided to foreclose on our lives, I could still feed my son. Harold paid for Noah to attend a prestigious private academy, another string attached to our limbs. He treated Noah's education like an investment that was failing to yield returns. At family barbecues, while the other grandchildren were praised for their spiraling football passes or their ballet recitals, Harold would watch Noah reading in the corner and shake his head. "The boy is slow," Harold would say to his friends, loud enough for Noah to hear. "He has no killer instinct. Unrealistic. He lives in the clouds." Holidays were the worst. Thanksgiving and Christmas became endurance tests. We would gather at Harold's estate, a place that smelled of pine needles and old money. Noah would sit at the far end of the table, silent and shrinking, while his cousins bragged about their lacrosse scholarships. When Noah tried to crack a joke to lighten the mood, the air would go stiff. His timing was always a little off, his voice a little too eager. The cousins would exchange glances that screamed of pity, and Harold would just sigh, cutting into his turkey with surgical precision. The topic of Noah's future always circled back to the money. My first husband had left a significant life insurance policy and a trust fund for Noah, intended to kick in when he turned 18. But shortly after I married Daniel, Harold had insisted on taking over the trusteeship. "I know the law better than anyone in this state," he had told me, tapping a manila folder on his mahogany desk. "You do not want the banks eating up the principal with fees. I will manage it. I will grow it. When the boy is a man, I will hand it over." It seemed logical at the time. Everyone agreed that Harold was a financial wizard. Even Daniel, who was climbing the ladder at the family law firm, told me it was for the best. Over the years, Daniel had morphed into a softer, blurrier version of his father. He was successful, yes, but he had no spine. Whenever I complained about Harold's insults, Daniel would rub his temples. "Eleanor, please," he would say, his voice weary. "Dad is just old school. Don't make a big thing out of nothing. In this family, you have to learn to let things slide." When Noah was 14, the school counselor suggested we have him tested. The diagnosis was attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It explained so much: the forgotten homework, the hyperfocus on obscure topics, the social awkwardness. But to Harold, it was just an excuse. ADHD. Harold scoffed when we told him. In my day, we called that being lazy. He just needs discipline. But the diagnosis unlocked something in Noah. He stopped trying to be a linebacker and started leaning into his brain. He discovered coding. He spent hours in his room, building complex worlds on his computer, designing games with intricate economies and storylines. He was brilliant at it. "Mom, look at this," he would say to me late at night, his eyes shining with a confidence he never showed downstairs. "I built a physics engine. It simulates gravity perfectly. One day, I'm going to open my own studio." I was so proud, but I was also afraid. I knew Harold would see this as playing with toys. The unease that had been simmering in my gut for a decade finally bubbled up the spring Noah got into college. He had been accepted into a top-tier technology program at a university 3 states away. We were celebrating in the kitchen, Noah actually smiling, when Harold dropped by. Well, Harold grunted, looking at the acceptance letter. At least it is a reputable school. I suppose the computer nonsense might pay off. "We need to look at the trust fund," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tuition is due in August." Harold waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry your pretty little head about the details, Eleanor. The fund will take care of it. Consider it. Considered. Your first husband's money. My management. The boy is covered." He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I realized in that moment that in 10 years, I had never seen a single bank statement. I had never seen a ledger. I had only heard Harold's voice, assuring me that everything was fine. And for the first time, I wondered if the safety net I thought my son had was actually just a hole in the ground. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, buried between a utility bill and a catalogue for garden furniture. It was a thin, standard envelope from the bank, addressed to the Whitaker Ridgeway Trust. I almost threw it in the recycling bin, assuming it was just another quarterly statement that Harold usually intercepted. But something made me open it. I unfolded the single sheet of crisp white paper, and my eyes scanned down to the bottom line. Ending balance $0 and 0 cents. I stared at the number. It did not make sense. My first husband had left nearly $300,000 for Noah's future. Even with 4 years of university tuition, there should have been a significant amount left to help him start his life. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I called Harold immediately. "Dad," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I just got a statement for Noah's trust. It says the balance is 0. Is that a mistake?" Harold's sigh crackled over the line, impatient and patronizing. "Eleanor, I have told you 1,000 times. You do not understand high finance. That money was used for tuition, for his dorm, for his living expenses, and I moved the rest into diversified investments so the boy would have his name on some actual corporate assets. It is complex. It is adult business. Do not interfere with things you do not understand." He hung up before I could ask what kind of investment required draining the account to 0. The unease in my stomach turned into a hard, cold stone. I went to my laptop and started digging through years of emails. I searched for trust and statement. Nothing. I realized with a jolt that for the last decade, every single official report had been routed to a generic email address, admin@whytakerlegal.com, that Harold had set up. I had only been carbon copied on a handful of meaningless newsletters. The next day at Kivora North Systems, I sat in the break room with Jenna, a senior analyst who had a nose for fraud. I told her about the letter. Jenna frowned, stirring her coffee. "Eleanor, that sounds wrong. Even with aggressive investing, a trust account should not just zero out without a paper trail. Let me ask you this. Have you ever actually held the physical copy of the original trust deed? The one you signed 20 years ago. I opened my mouth to say yes, but the word died in my throat. I remembered signing a stack of papers Harold had put in front of me while I was grieving, trusting him completely. But I had never kept a copy. "No," I whispered. "Never." That night, I confronted Daniel. I asked him to bring me the contract. "It is in the archives at the firm," Daniel said, avoiding my eyes as he loosened his tie. "It takes time to request old files. They are in off-site storage. I will get around to it." He promised to bring it home the next day. Then the day after. 2 weeks passed, and he stopped mentioning it altogether. Then came the afternoon. Noah came home early, his face pale with rage. He threw his car keys on the counter. "I went to the bank," Noah said, his voice shaking. "I tried to apply for that starter credit card you told me about, the one for graduates." "Did they approve it?" I asked. "No." He spat out. "They laughed at me. The manager came out and told me my debt-to-income ratio is insane. Mom. He said I am listed as a co-guarantor on a high-risk corporate loan for $1 million. I never signed for a loan. I have never even had a credit card." The room spun. I pulled out a chair and sat him down at the kitchen table. For the first time, I told him everything. I told him about the money his father left. I told him about the zero balance letter. I told him about Harold's vague explanations and Daniel's stalling. As I spoke, I watched the hurt in Noah's eyes harden into something else. The sadness evaporated, replaced by the cold, sharp focus of a predator. "Mom," he said quietly, cutting me off. "Stop. I can check everything. I am not stupid. I know how to read data. Let me help you." He opened his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the user-friendly banking interfaces I was used to. He pulled up credit reports, public records, and business filings. We sat there for hours as the sun went down, illuminated only by the blue glow of the screen. "Here," Noah said, pointing to a line of text. "The loan I supposedly guaranteed is for a company called Bayline Crest Resorts. And look at the officers." He clicked a tab. A list of names appeared. My breath caught in my throat. There were half a dozen shell companies listed as investors. Names I had never heard of, like Horizon Merit Holdings and Blue Water Capital. But they all shared one thing. Registered agent? Noah read aloud, his voice flat. Harold Whitaker. Harold Whitaker. Harold Whitaker. My son looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he did not look like the boy who was afraid of being called an idiot. He looked like the smartest person in the room, and he was furious. "He stole it," Noah whispered. "He stole everything, and he used my name to cover his tracks." The kitchen table had become our command center. Noah sat hunched over his laptop, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of spreadsheets and bank routing numbers. He was doing what Harold had always claimed he could not do. He was analyzing complex systems, but instead of video game mechanics, he was dismantling his grandfather's financial architecture. "Look at this pattern." "Mom," Noah said, pointing to a column of figures. Every time a dividend hit the main trust account, it was immediately wired out within 48 hours. It goes through 2 intermediary banks and lands here. Horizon Merit Holdings. It sounded impressive, like a firm that managed pension funds or built skyscrapers. But Noah had dug deeper. He pulled up a state registry filing. Horizon Merit Holdings listed its primary address as a post office box in a strip mall 3 towns over. And the authorized signatory was not a board of directors, it was Harold Whitaker. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. I needed professional help, and not from anyone Daniel knew. Following Jenna's advice, I made an appointment with Veronica Hale. She was a forensic accountant and attorney who operated out of a sleek, glass-walled office downtown, far away from the old money country clubs where Harold held court. I sat in Veronica's office, my hands gripping the strap of my purse. I had brought everything Noah and I could find: printed emails, bank notifications, and the few scraps of paper I had saved over the years. Veronica was a woman of few words. She read through the documents in silence, her eyes scanning the lines with terrifying speed. Finally, she looked up. "Mrs. Ridgway, these transfers are highly irregular. Based on what you have shown me, I think you and your son have cause for concern." 3 days later, we were back in her office. This time, the mood was different. The air felt heavy, charged with the static of a coming storm. Veronica placed a single document in the center of the desk. It was a photocopy of an investment authorization agreement, dated 4 years ago. This document authorizes the transfer of the entire principal of the trust, nearly $300,000, into Horizon Merit Holdings for speculative development projects. Veronica explained, her voice even. "It requires the signature of the primary beneficiary's guardian. That is you." I looked at the bottom of the page. There, in blue ink, was my name, Eleanor Ridgway. The loops of the L and the Y were sweeping and elegant. It looked exactly like my handwriting. I felt like I had been punched in the chest. I stared at the date. It was August 28th, the very week we had moved Noah into his dorm room. The week I had been so distracted by pride and sadness that I could barely remember my own phone number. I never signed this. I stammered. my voice trembling. I have never seen this paper in my life. Veronica nodded slowly. I suspected as much. The pressure on the pen strokes is wrong. If we can prove this is a forgery, and that the funds were used for Harold's personal gain or to prop up his own failing companies, we are no longer looking at civil mismanagement. This is embezzlement. This is grand larceny. Beside me. Noah was shaking. It was a subtle vibration that started in his hands and travelled up to his shoulders. He was not looking at the paper anymore. He was staring at the wall. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He called me stupid, Noah whispered, his voice cracking. For 20 years. He called me stupid. He told everyone I was useless. And the whole time. He was using my name. He was stealing my father's money to pay for his own mistakes. Noah turned to me, and I saw tears standing in his eyes, hot and angry. He made me believe I was a burden. Mom. But I wasn't a burden. I was his piggy bank. The realization hit me harder than the financial loss. My silence had not bought peace. My silence had bought Harold time. It had given him the cover of darkness he needed to rob my son blind. I had allowed him to control the narrative, the house we lived in, the schools Noah attended, the very way the world perceived my boy, all while he was cannibalizing our future. I looked at Veronica. The fear that had defined my life for 2 decades began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. What do we do? I asked. Veronica leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. If you want to go to the end of this, Eleanor, we do not just ask for the money back. We file criminal charges. We drag the whole system he built into the light. But you have to be ready. You have to be willing to destroy the image of the perfect Whittaker family. You have to be willing to confront them. I reached out and took Noah's hand. His grip was strong. I am ready, I said. Start the paperwork. I sat at the dining room table with the file Veronica had prepared, resting on the polished mahogany surface. The house was quiet, filled with the kind of heavy silence that precedes a tornado. When Daniel finally walked through the door, loosening his tie after a long day at Whittaker and Sons, he looked tired. He smiled when he saw me, but the smile faltered as soon as he saw the expression on my face. Elle, he asked, dropping his briefcase. Is everything okay? I did not stand up. I simply pushed the folder across the table toward him. We need to talk about the trust fund, Daniel, and I need you to tell me the truth. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Eleanor, not this again. I told you. I will get the papers when I have time. Dad is handling it. Dad isn't handling it, I said, my voice shaking slightly. He stole it, and I have the proof right here. Daniel froze. He walked over slowly and opened the folder. He stared at the bank transfers, the shell company registrations, and the credit denial letter Noah had received. I watched his eyes scan the pages. I expected shock. I expected outrage. But instead, I saw recognition. You knew. I whispered. It was not a question. Daniel closed the folder, refusing to meet my eyes. It is complicated, Eleanor. The real estate market took a hit a few years ago. Dad needed liquidity to save the Bayline project. He borrowed against the assets. It was supposed to be temporary. Borrowed. I stood up then, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. He drained the account to 0. He used Noah's name to guarantee high-risk loans. And you knew I knew he was moving things around. Daniel stammered, his face flushing red. but he promised it would be paid back with interest. He said it was for the good of the family. If the business went under, we would all lose everything. I reached into the folder and pulled out the photocopy of the investment authorization. I slammed it down in front of him. And this, I demanded. Did you know about this too? Look at the signature. Daniel? Look at it. He looked down at my forged signature, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. He told me he had your verbal consent, Daniel said weakly. He said, Eleanor doesn't understand the paperwork, so I just helped her out. I didn't think it was this serious. You didn't think forgery was serious. I stared at the man I had shared a bed with for 20 years, and suddenly, he looked like a stranger. He looked small. He looked exactly like the terrified boy who used to hide behind his father's leg. You watched your father commit a crime against your own stepson, and you said nothing. You chose him. You chose standing on the right side of Harold Whittaker over standing up for Noah. That is not fair. Daniel snapped, his defensive instincts finally kicking in. I did it to protect us. Do you have any idea the pressure I am under if I go against him? He destroys people. Eleanor, you know that. I do know that, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. Because I watched him destroy Noah's confidence for 2 decades while you sat there and ate your dinner. I turned to walk away, unable to look at him any longer. If you pursue this, Daniel called out, his voice rising in panic. If you get lawyers involved, the whole family will turn on you. Dad will cut us off. You will be a pariah in this town. You will have no place here. I stopped at the doorway and looked back at him. The expensive furniture, the heavy curtains, the perfectly manicured life. None of it was mine. Daniel, I said softly, I have lived my entire adult life in a house I do not own, driving a car leased in your father's name, trying to please people who think my son is an idiot. I think I am used to having no place here. I went upstairs and packed a single suitcase. I took only the clothes I had bought with my own salary and the few pieces of jewelry my first husband had given me. I walked past the master bedroom where Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. I did not say goodbye. I drove to a small, furnished rental apartment near the city centre that I had secured that afternoon. The walls were bare and the carpet was thin, but the air felt different. It was cleaner. For the first time in years, I lay down to sleep without the drone of Daniel's television or the constant pinging of the Whittaker family group chat. The next morning, I met Veronica at a coffee shop. I signed the power of attorney document with a steady hand. Are you sure? Veronica asked, looking at me over the rim of her glasses. Once we file this, there is no going back. I am done going back, I said. For 20 years, I was a Whittaker wife. Today, I am just Noah's mother, and that is enough. The transition from leaving Daniel to organizing a criminal investigation was seamless. There was no room for grief, only strategy. Veronica Hale introduced me to Mason Crowley, a financial investigator retired from the FBI, who looked like a kindly grandfather but spoke with the precision of a laser. Mason did not chase individual transactions. He hunted patterns. Working from my spare rental apartment, Mason tracked the digital breadcrumbs. The funds from Horizon Merit Holdings did not disappear into the void. They were systematically routed to patch holes in a disastrous real estate venture called Bayline Crest Resorts, a large coastal development that had stalled years earlier. Daniel, I discovered, had held a minority stake in that specific project. The Whitakers were not just stealing from Noah, they were covering their own failing assets using stolen money. After 4 weeks of work, Veronica marched into the Harborfield District Attorney's office with a 10-inch thick file. The evidence was undeniable forged documents, systematic misuse of a trust, and clear self-dealing by a high-profile former judge. The DA's office confirmed it. Mrs. Ridgway. If this holds up, this is a major case, the deputy DA told Veronica. We will issue the arrest warrant and the search warrant for Whitaker and Sons, but we need to choose the opportune moment for service. We want maximum impact and minimum risk of flight. Life, meanwhile, kept moving forward outside the walls of my war room. Noah and his longtime girlfriend, Lila, announced their engagement. They were planning a large wedding, the kind of grand affair that required them to invite every single Whitaker relative, including Harold, Daniel, and their powerful circle of friends and business associates. One evening, Noah called me from his small apartment. "Mom," he asked, his voice hesitant. "I need to finalize the list. Should I invite Grandpa Harold?" I paused, the pen hovering over a legal pad. I looked at the arrest warrant, which was still just a piece of paper in Veronica's file cabinet. "Yes," I said, my voice measured and slow. "Yes, you should invite him. If you are ready to see his true self exposed in front of everyone he cares about." Noah understood instantly. He wasn't just looking for an acquittal. He wanted a public execution of Harold's reputation. Veronica was the one who formalized the idea. "The wedding is the stage, Eleanor," she explained. "It brings together every key witness, every family member, and every political contact Harold has. The social pressure will be devastating. If we serve the warrant there, he will be crushed." I agreed, but I had a non-negotiable condition. Before the cuffs go on, I told Veronica, leaning across her massive desk, I want 3 minutes. I want to look him in the eye, and I want to say every single word he ever said about my son, right in the place where he thinks he is most honored. Veronica, who usually dealt only in cold legal facts, gave me a slight, understanding nod. Over the following weeks, we secured sworn statements. A former bookkeeper for Horizon Merit Holdings confirmed Harold had ordered the fraudulent transactions. A real estate broker recalled Harold bragging. He told me the trust money was safe with him. The broker's deposition read, he said, "The kids are fools. Their money is best left to me." The pieces were all in place. The final confirmation came late one Thursday night. "Eleanor, it is set." Veronica's voice came over the phone. "The district attorney has signed the full arrest warrant for Harold and a search warrant for the Whitaker and Sons offices. And the date I asked, my heart thumping a steady, heavy drum against my ribs. "The date is locked in," Veronica confirmed. "The warrant will be served at the Grand Harborfield Hotel on Noah's wedding day." The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of simulated normalcy layered over meticulous planning. I helped Lila choose the final touches for her gown, adjusted the seating chart with Daniel's frantic cousin, and simultaneously held covert conference calls with Veronica and Mason. We discussed the signal, a specific text message I would send Veronica that would trigger the police presence. The details had to be flawless. Noah knew I was doing something. He knew I had moved out. And he knew I was preparing to confront Harold about the stolen trust. But I kept the precise timing and the criminal charges a secret, wanting him to focus on his happiness. "Mom, what is going to happen when I go on my honeymoon?" He asked me one afternoon over lunch. "Nothing that needs to concern you," I replied, trying to sound dismissive. "You focus on Lila, on your marriage, on your future. The rest is just noise. Let me handle the noise." Even Daniel tried to reach me. He called repeatedly, begging for a meeting, talking about reconciliation. I refused to speak to him directly. All communication went through Veronica, who had sent a terse legal notice detailing the scope of our investigation. Daniel's tone shifted from desperate husband to frantic lawyer. He started sending worried messages about an unexpected audit at Whittaker and Sons, clearly feeling the pressure of our quiet war machine. The night before the wedding, I could not sleep. I paced the floor of my sterile rental apartment. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my resolve. What if the police were late? What if Harold, with his legal mind, managed to spin the charges, turning me into the bitter, greedy stepmother who ruined his grandson's wedding? Most of all, I worried about Noah. I did not want the last memories of his bachelor life to be corrupted by his grandfather's malice. I kept rehearsing my speech, the few minutes I had claimed to expose Harold for the liar he was. The morning of the wedding was chaos. I arrived at the Grand Harborfield Hotel suite, designated for the mother of the groom. Lila's bridesmaids buzzing around like bright, nervous bees. My phone rang. It was Veronica. "Eleanor. A slight complication," she whispered. The patrol officer assigned to serve the warrant was swapped out last minute. The replacement called to confirm, but he might be 20 minutes behind schedule. My stomach dropped. 20 minutes was an eternity. It was enough time for Harold to launch a verbal attack on Noah. Enough time for him to ruin the entire mood before I could deliver my blow. "Can you stall him?" I asked, my voice tight. "I am trying," Veronica said, "but you have to hold steady. This is a good thing. Eleanor, when he is overconfident, that is when he makes his mistake." I took her advice, letting a forced calm settle over my features. The small ceremony was held downstairs in a beautiful conservatory. I watched from my seat as Harold, in the front row, radiated his customary power. He shook hands with senators and business partners, sharing old war stories from the courtroom, utterly convinced of his own righteousness. He looked like a king, entirely above reproach. When Noah and Lila exchanged rings, I saw the vulnerable look flicker across my son's face, just for an instant. His eyes darted toward Harold, that 8-year-old boy still craving the smallest sign of approval. My chest tightened with a familiar, aching pain, that flicker of longing. That was the final piece of fuel. The main dinner reception began shortly after sunset. The clinking and laughing swelled again, louder and more arrogant than before. Then the MC, a smooth, professional voice, stepped onto the stage. And now, the MC announced, his voice ringing through the ballroom. "We invite the grandfather of the groom, the Honourable Harold Whittaker, to the stage for a few words." The applause was thunderous, an acknowledgement of Harold's wealth and status. I gripped my clutch bag tighter, the hard plastic of the USB pressing into my palm. My heart rate jumped, each beat a heavy, deliberate hammer stroke. The time had come. Harold ascended the small stage with the confidence of a man who believed the spotlight was his birthright. He took the microphone, adjusting it only slightly, as he was used to addressing a large hall. He started exactly as I knew he would, with self-deprecating but ultimately flattering humor about his own family. "Noah, you were always a sweet boy," he began, chuckles rippling through the wealthy crowd. I remember when he was 7 years old. He tried to fix my antique clock with duct tape, bless his heart. More laughter. He was painting Noah as charmingly inept, softening the ground for the insult he was about to drop. Then, Harold leaned closer to the microphone, his voice lowering just a notch for dramatic effect. The pretense of warmth vanished. He put on his famous frankness, the blunt honesty that everyone in Harborfield admired because it meant they were not the target. But the truth is, I have always been honest, Harold declared, and I said it right there, at his mother's second wedding, 2 decades ago. To everyone who would listen, that boy is an idiot. But, he added, his voice lifting in a show of false grace, sometimes being an idiot is a blessing. The room stiffened. The laughter died, replaced by a strained, uncomfortable silence. A few nervous, high-pitched giggles floated up from Daniel's cousins, unsure if they were supposed to join in. I looked at Noah. He was rigid, his gaze fixed on the polished wood of the stage floor. Lila, sensing the public humiliation, squeezed his hand desperately under the table. For me, the familiar coldness of the insult was overwhelming. It was as if all the colour had drained out of the opulent room, leaving only black and white. Harold continued, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. He was too drunk on his own power to notice the awkwardness of his audience. He's a fool, really, which is why he trusted the family to handle his money. Leave the finance to the adults, the people who understand the market. It's why he's sitting here tonight, debt-free, ready to marry this beautiful girl. He had just unwittingly confessed to the motive for the crime we were investigating, but the guests merely assumed he was making a difficult joke about Noah being too naive for business. I stood up. My chair scraped against the marble floor, a loud, abrasive sound that cracked the silence like a gunshot. Heads turned instantly toward the back. Lila looked over, her expression pure confusion. "Mom," she mouthed. Noah's eyes found mine, filled with alarm and total bewilderment. My legs felt heavy, like lead weights. But I started walking. I moved slowly, deliberately, toward the stage. Each step was the culmination of 20 years of suppressed anger. When I reached the podium, I was breathing evenly, my voice surprisingly steady. "I apologize," I said to the MC, who looked pale and bewildered. "I need to say a few words to Harold." And to everyone here, Harold, whose face registered a flicker of annoyance, thought I was going to thank him or try to smooth over his crude joke. He gave me a condescending smile, the smile of a superior allowing a child to speak. He handed me the microphone. "All right, Eleanor," he said, his voice loud and patronizing. "Make it quick. There are other people waiting to make a toast." I ignored him. I looked first at Noah, memorizing his panic, then turned my gaze to the room full of elite guests. I spoke clearly, projecting my voice to reach the furthest corner of the ballroom. 20 years ago, at another wedding dinner, this man, I said, nodding toward Harold, called my son an idiot. Today, I want to tell all of you who the real fool is and who the criminal is. The room went utterly still. The background music, which had been playing softly, sputtered and died as a nervous technician scrambled to turn it off. Every single eye in the vast ballroom was locked onto the stage. Harold, for the first time since I met him, looked genuinely unsettled. The mask of confidence was finally beginning to crack. I held the microphone close, savoring the absolute silence of the room. It was the silence of a packed courtroom before the verdict. Harold is right about one thing, I began, my voice clear and deliberate. He called my son an idiot 20 years ago at my second wedding. It was a day I happened to be testing an old pocket recorder because my daughter-in-law wanted to hear the vows later. I pulled the black USB stick from my bag. It looked insignificant. A tiny shard of plastic against the glittering backdrop of the hotel. I walked over to the sound technician, quickly plugged the USB into the console, and with a swift flick of the microphone's switch, I connected the output. I kept that file. I continued, my eyes scanning the Whittaker table, where Daniel and his siblings were already turning ghostly pale. Not the vows, just the aftermath. I think we should all hear the official toast that evening. I hit the play button. Harold's younger, booming voice filled the ballroom, followed by the shattering sound of glass. Your daughter may choose a husband. Fine. But that boy is truly an idiot. The recording echoed, instantly and chillingly translated by the software's volume. You'd better watch out, or he'll drag this whole house down with him. Then came the hideous, nervous laughter of the guests. I let the laughter play for 3 full, agonizing seconds before I snatched the microphone back, cutting the recording short. The ballroom was completely mute now, the laughter replaced by a suffocating, collective shame. That boy, I said, pointing at Noah, is standing right there, celebrating his successful career as a software engineer. That boy is not stupid. I held up the photocopy of the forged contract. But someone here is an idiot who thought I would not notice when $300,000 of my son's inheritance was stolen. This is my forged signature. The money, left by his deceased father, was wired by Harold to shell companies like Horizon Merit Holdings to bail out his failing Bayline Crest Resorts project. Daniel finally exploded. He surged out of his chair, nearly knocking it over. Eleanor, stop it. This is family business. You have to turn that off, he stammered, his face white with terror. I looked at him, my expression utterly devoid of emotion. No, I said, cold and hard. This is not family business. This is fraud. This is a felony. And my son has a right to know the truth about what was taken from him. Noah, who had been frozen in shock, finally moved. His eyes were red, but he did not cry. Instead, he took 2 long strides toward the stage. He stood shoulder to shoulder with me, his presence solid and unwavering. He reached down and took my hand. A silent, powerful affirmation of our alliance, just as Harold tried to snatch the microphone back. 2 men in plain clothes walked swiftly but deliberately into the ballroom, followed by Veronica Hale. The room instantly registered the shift in authority. Veronica flashed a badge toward Harold, her voice cutting through the rising murmur. Mr. Harold Whittaker, you are under arrest on suspicion of trust fund abuse, financial fraud, and document forgery. The chaos was immediate. Gasps erupted across the room. Phones were raised. The powerful guests began whispering frantically, their loyalties visibly fracturing. This is a lie, Harold roared, his composure finally dissolving. This is the bitter revenge of a spiteful woman. It is all fabricated. But when the officer produced the red-stamped warrant and began reading his rights, Harold's large frame started to shake uncontrollably. He suddenly looked every one of his 78 years. As the officers expertly cuffed Harold's hands behind his back, securing the cuffs over his polished French cuffs, I leaned in one last time, ensuring only he could hear me. The only fool in this room for 20 years. I murmured, my voice a blade of ice, was me. Because I stayed silent. Not anymore. The police led Harold away, passing the table where his horrified children sat in stunned silence. Daniel was ushered away by Veronica's assistant to talk to a detective. I turned back to the stunned ballroom, taking a deep breath. The music was still off. "You may leave now," I announced to the silent guests, addressing the entire room. "You may walk out and pretend this never happened. Or," I paused, giving them a fierce, unrepentant look, "you may stay, and you may dance for my son. The one who you just saw is not stupid at all." Later, standing on a quiet balcony overlooking the city lights, Noah wrapped me in a long, tight hug. "I thought you were going to stay quiet again, Mum," he whispered into my hair. I pulled back, holding his face in my hands. His eyes were bright, fierce, and finally, free. "Never again. My son," I told him. "Tonight is the night I gave you back everything that was stolen from you with those 2 stupid words." Then we walked back into the ballroom, leaving the ghost of the Whitakers behind, to let Noah and Lila celebrate the start of their real life. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope you all enjoyed the ending. Let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what you thought about Eleanor's final move. Please hit that like button, subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary for more stories, and don't forget to hit the hype button to make sure this story gets heard by everyone.